Congressman Roskam. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Baylor.
I want to get right into it. So the Congress to Campus program, you're here with us. Why, again, I want to ask you the same thing. Why choose Elon? Why come here? What do you think our students can gain out of the big event tonight?
Why choose Elon? Hey, there's a lot of exciting things that are going on this campus, and you can just get the feel for it just walking around. And I got here just a few hours ago, but have been warmly greeted, and we've been in a couple classrooms and had lunch with students, and looking forward to some other interactions later on, and then we're going to have an open session tonight. So it's part of an effort from the former members of Congress Association to engage with tomorrow's leaders and to give them a sense of this is what Congress is like, this is what you should be thinking about if you want to engage in this process, and you should engage in this process, and here's why. So we're all about reflecting an institution that we're proud to have been a part of and that we want to see succeed in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, very good. Can you tell me one of those important pieces of legislation that you think over your career is long-lasting to you, or that one work that you felt like, this is your legacy?
The thing that I've spent the most time on recently has been the big tax reform package. And I would argue that it's been transformational for our economy. Our economy was underperforming for a long time for a lot of different reasons, but one of them was we had a tax code that had been 30 years old and had not been updated. And if you think about that, the entire internet had come about as a commercial enterprise in that time. The global nature of the economy had changed, and yet we had a tax code that was literally built for yesterday. So updating it has made the U.S. economy more positive and more opportunistic, and it's made it grow faster. And that is significant, not just from an economic point of view, but it also increases American influence around the world. So in a nutshell, I would say that's something that I was very active in, and I was pleased to be a part of it.
Very good. Now, with elections being every 2 years, do you feel, for Congressman, do you feel that there were times while you were in office that you felt you were always running for an election and that it kind of got in the way of serving your constituents? And how do you balance those two? Because it seems, especially with the media, that it's always looking for the next election right after election night happens.
So if you were going to design a system from the beginning again, I think that the American founders would not have have the House have 2-year elections. And the reason is they contemplated this at a time when it took weeks to get to the nation's capital and so forth. And the communication was cumbersome. Now it is easy to interact with constituents. Now all the social media things and so forth. So those days have changed. Now, is it going to change? Is the Constitution going to get amended? Nah, never. So that's the way it is. And rather than complaining about it, you just have to learn to manage it. But to your point, no sooner would I be sworn into office than 9 months later, literally of September following that January, I would be circulating petitions to get on the ballot in my constituency. So it's a bit much, but look, it's consistent. And it's one of the ways that the American public has to adjust the dials on Washington, D.C., and they use it, obviously.
Now, I also want to get your perspective a little bit on today's political climate. And you entered the House in 2007. So even just from then to 12 years later, there's been, it seems to be that the nation is much more divided, and it seems to be, and the temperature of Congress seems to be heated. Can you talk a little about, could you compare the two a little bit? And do you think that our nation is as divided as it's perceived to be?
I don't think it's as divided as it's perceived to be, and here's the proof of that. There have been a number of things that have moved through the Congress on a bipartisan basis that have been significant, and yet they don't get a lot of attention. So one of the examples is working through the opioid crisis that has been crushing so many communities and crushing so many people in our country, and yet on a bipartisan basis, both Republicans and Democrats came together, moved through the House, moved through the Senate, signed into law by the President, very significant relief on that front. Or something that I was speaking to Elon students today earlier. It was an effort to reform some changes in a civil asset forfeiture program that the Internal Revenue Service was abusing, or working together to combat Medicare fraud. Any number of these things that move through, they're bipartisan, they're overwhelmingly bipartisan, and yet they don't get a lot of attention. Why? Because they don't involve anybody snarling at one another on television. And so I think part of how we're telling the story sometimes is a challenge, and I'm of the view that there's so much more that binds us together than actually pulls us apart.
So speaking of something that seems to be pulling us apart, border security. Can I get your thoughts on the appropriations bill, the national emergency declaration?
I don't think this is a national emergency, and I'm not persuaded by President Trump's argument that it is a national emergency. I was a critic when President Obama was overstating and overreaching on executive power when he said famously, I have a pen and a phone and I'm going to do what I'm going to do as it relates to immigration of all things. President Obama was very declarative, and now President Trump is falling into the same trap. I firmly believe in co-equal branches of government. I believe it's the prerogative of the Congress to appropriate money. And while I may be more sympathetic to the ultimate goal of President Trump in trying to enhance border security, the declaration of emergency, this does not meet that threshold in my view.
Very good. And I just have one last question for you. In the President's State of the Union last week, the President called for Americans to, quote, reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and the common good. How do you think in today's politics we can get there?
Look, we've got to be balanced. We need to have enforcement and oversight of our laws, but to the extent where you have other countries that underperform are when they do fall into the politics of revenge. Revenge is not very satisfactory, and particularly when law enforcement is abused. And I've seen that sometimes in the past. When your opponents have prosecutorial authority, that can be a very loathsome thing, and it undermines ultimately law enforcement. So I think everybody needs to be held to account, and there's appropriate oversight that we need in this country, but we got to make sure that it's based on the merits and not based on the politics.
Well, Congressman Roskam, thank you very much.
Thanks,
very
Baylor.
good.
Thank you very much.
Great having you.
Thank you.
Thanks.